Welcome to another edition of Chicago Crossing Railcar Reviews. Eric here with you. Welcome back to the layout, and today we will be reviewing these. They are the ScaleTrains Thrall 48-foot two-hood coil steel cars. So these cars retail at $49.99. I ordered mine direct from the manufacturer as a pre-order for $39.99. Not a terribly high price when one considers that these are supposed to be some ultra-detailed rail cars with removable hoods, and that sounds great. So today what we'll do is we'll unbox one of these cars. We will take a look at all of the features and details on the models. We will also have a running session and take a look at how these cars perform on the rails on Chicago Crossing layout. And last but not least, we'll certainly also compare these with some of the other 48-foot coil steel cars that are currently out on the market. So let's dive right in and get this unboxed. So let's go ahead and get started. I had bought 4 of these models as pre-orders just to create a nice little train's worth of them. As you can see here, this is the specific model that I'll be reviewing. This is the BNSF car with mismatched hoods. I thought that was kind of a cool feature. This is car number 534103. And you can see the ScaleTrains number there below. So as is typical for ScaleTrains, you see there's a nice shiny cover on top of a jewel case. And on the back you can also see that there is information about the prototype, which is great. This is the Rivet Counter series, so we're certainly expecting a lot of detail here. And you know, it's part of the trend of increasingly detailed N Scale rail cars. So here's the model itself. Looks really cool. As you can see, those mismatched hoods. One is a Burlington Northern paint scheme, and the other one is BNSF. And then you see the car itself. You also notice that this comes with steel coil loads. They look quite detailed. If you have a look there, you can see that they've actually got the ties around the coils as well as the individual coils themselves. That's cool. All right. On the back, you see quite a bit of features. You can pause this if you want to take a look at those. They have low profile wheels, so they should operate on all of the different codes of rail. And let's take a look-see. Cover comes off, and as typical, you see there's a little bit of tape there, so we'll just go ahead and see if we can chop that. Okay, and that opens us up to the model. I have a little plastic sheet here. And there it is. So what's kind of cool about this particular model, and I'll just pull it out here briefly. Oh, the hoods already came off, so they're basically ready to go. I'll pull out each separately. So there's the hoods. As you can see, I love the faded Cascade green here. You know, a car like this, I mean, obviously they're painted to look faded. This will be very, very happy to be weathered to give some unevenness to it. As you can see, the car itself is, you know, full dark-colored BNSF livery, sort of an oxide red, with the interior hardwood, which is super cool. Okay. Well, looks like a nice, cool model, that's for sure. On top of that, again, we've got these 4 steel coils. Pull these out. They have their own little piece of plastic there to protect them. And you can see they do have their bindings, and also if you look up close, you can actually see does look like a steel coil rather than just a solid thing. That's a nice feature. A little piece of plastic, or of this isn't plastic, it's just a little piece of foam that was in there to protect the parts of the model. And then in the back here, in the underside, we have some accessories. Specifically, we have these little barriers that are used to separate the steel coils themselves. So that came in the 42-foot model that I reviewed a while back. As you can see, they're here too, and they no doubt snap into these little areas right over here. So first off, one thing I've noticed about this model is, again, unloaded, it is incredibly light. We're going to weigh this thing with its hoods on without a load in there and see how it's doing. Alright, so I've set up a scale with weight in ounces. I guess that's the American way. And typically for 50-foot or thereabout rail car, you want about 1.1 ounces of mass. Let's see how we do here. And wow, we are dramatically underweight. If you roll this thing without the load in there, or if you want to switch it with the hoods off and no load in there, then you're running a really, really light car. Absent the hoods, that takes off 0.1 ounces. And then if we put on all 4 coils, now we hit to a little bit over the weight standard, which is actually nice. It means it'll stay on the track. But clearly what this means is you're looking at a really underweight car if you're not running it with the coils in place. So these coils essentially serve as weights in order to get this car up to its proper weight, and that's something to consider in terms of how this will actually handle on the tracks. So let's take a look at some of the details on the models. First, we can have a look at the hoods. Again, those are separable, which I think is kind of a first for this type of model. In any case, you can see that these hoods are, quite detailed. You have the individual grab rails. These things look very fragile. They appear to be maybe wire, which is good. But this is a highly detailed model. You can see you have the rails on all sides. You also have the little apparatus up here for stacking the hoods on top of each other, basically a support for another hood to be set on top. And you have the lift ring for a crane. As you can see here, the rails, these little handrails themselves, they fit into these tiny little grooves here. And they're pretty well assembled, but man, this just looks fragile as heck. This is the other hood that came with the model. This is the one in the BNSF paint scheme. Again, it's faded relative to what a normal new car would look, so that's actually really nice. But it is the faded oxide red. Assembly looks pretty good altogether here. Again, I think these little wire rails fit in reasonably well into those sockets, although they seem to be just a tad off on this one, for instance. If you look at prototypes, I think these rails often get bent because these hoods are being smacked around and moved around constantly, so that might actually be inadvertently prototypical. But for something of this size, I think that's fine. If we take a look at the car itself, and ooh, man, I should not try to drop this because this is like a pretty fragile looking model. What you can see here is that you've got a ton of detail. So we've got a etched and painted running board all the way around. Unlike the 42-foot model that I got, this one looks to be completely straight, which is a nice thing to see. The other thing that you notice is the undercarriage on this, much like the 48 or the 42-foot model that I reviewed earlier, is quite detailed. You have all of the braking gear on there, and a lot of that looks to be either, in this case, like a really fragile piece of plastic that's quite bendy. Some of it looks to be wire as well. You also have on the ends some a brake wheel, and you also have reflective striping there. It's obviously not reflective, it's painted on, but it looks good. And of course, as is typical for ScaleTrains, you also have very, very tiny printed text on there, which is actually legible under magnification, which is cool. The wheels look to be kind of a typical blackened steel, and the trucks themselves actually look quite good, generally speaking. We don't have, obviously, features that sometimes you find in HO, like, you know, bearings that actually move on the outside, but things look pretty good here. And you have the typical ScaleTrains coupling mechanisms on there as well. On the interior, again, what I love about these models is that you have an actual wooden or faux wooden interior that's actually molded. It's not simply painted. The other thing I love about this wood is that it actually is kind of a pin wash effect in there, so you can see the individual wooden planks. That actually looks really nicely detailed, and you have even the little tie downs on there as well, which is super cool. There are very, very small spots for attaching those little plastic dividers that would go in between the coils. I think that separates one coil here and one here, and then likewise for the loading scheme of this car. And of course, the trucks are mounted in with screws rather than with pins, which makes removal probably quite a bit easier. And these are body mounted couplings as well, which is great to see. So overall, that's a pretty nice model. I'm happy with the amount of detail that's on there. It looks quite good. There are even, again, wire little handrails and grab irons that you can see all throughout the model on the corners, and that looks quite good altogether. And so with that, you know, it's probably a good idea to compare this with some of the other two-hood coil steel cars that are out on the market and see what the differences are. One good example is this. This is the Atlas N Scale Master Line twin hood 48-foot coil car. This is not sold as a super detailed model. It is not the Atlas Master Plus, which again is sort of a BMLA substitute. But in this case, what you can see is there is a distinctive difference between the amount of detail on, say, a more typical car versus what is actually on the ScaleTrains car, and you can see why those are sold at a higher price point. This, the MSRP was $32.95. I picked this up for, I think, something like $22.99 over at Lombard Hobbies when I was visiting Chicago not so long ago. And it's a nice car. These look pretty good. This is a somewhat more weathered and graffitied example. This I had taken a little bit of liberty with as an early graffiti experiment and weathering experiment, so it's not perfect and probably needs a little bit of revising, but you get the general idea. These cars will look pretty good if you put some weathering on them and make them, look their age. But in any case, those are good models. There's nothing wrong with them, certainly. And it goes to show you that for a $39.99 price point, you certainly can get quite a bit more. So $10 more in this case, and you get cars with removable hoods, you get loads, and you get quite a lot of detail in them. This is one of the older red caboose kits. Again, this is a weathered model. This is not something where it came out of the box this way. And, again, if you weather these, they look absolutely fantastic, even given the amount of detail that's just on these cars themselves. All of these models do have some amount of detail on the underside as well. But again, relative to ScaleTrains, I do think you are getting your money's worth in terms of the additional detail. So that's always good to see. One thing to note is if you take the Atlas models and put them on the scale, then basically you're getting 1.5 ounces. So you're getting pretty much an appropriately, if not slightly overweight car. Again, I don't think overweight is really an issue. I think underweight usually is more of one. So again, if you're trying to run these ScaleTrains models very similarly to trying to run, say, the Atlas master models or the ScaleTrains 42-foot models, you're looking at an underweight car if you either remove the hoods or try to run it without a load. So that's simply something to consider in terms of how these will handle. If you put them in the wrong place in a longer train, you're definitely going to risk a stringline derailment or something like that. Well, here I've got 4 different models. So 2 of these are Norfolk and Southern. One of these models is CTRX, or CTRN rather, which is another one of the faded and distressed. You can also get a version of this that is just the new paint scheme. And of course, we've got the one that I reviewed here. As you can see, each one has a distinctive paint scheme on them. Here you've got a Norfolk and Western bottom, and you've got the newly painted Norfolk Southern tops. That's actually the same is true with this one, where you've also got an NW running number, but you've got NS hoods. I love that. And this one also has these warnings about which cars will take which covers. That's always kind of cool to see, because again, you see these things run sometimes with mismatches on the hoods and stuff like that. Generally speaking, I would say the assembly of these cars is fairly consistent. The worst of the batch is probably this one, where again, as I've seen earlier, you have a warping in the running board material. This one has a couple of warps on this side. You also have a lot of warping in these tiny little grab irons or grab rails that are actually on the hoods. This one is probably the worst offender with that. In my view, a car that looks like this probably, I don't consider that to be passing for quality control personally. This is the same issue that I saw on the 42-foot Coil car, and you see it here. A couple of other notes about handling these cars is, again, when you have the load in there, basically what you have is a reasonably weighty loose piece of round metal sitting inside of a fairly shallow tub. And what that means is, if you roll this car over to take a look at it, see what happens, is you will knock the hoods off of there. So you have to handle these things incredibly carefully in order to make sure that you don't do that from a height and end up damaging the details on these hoods. One other thing that you have to do is you have to be really careful in terms of how you place these hoods on there. These hoods are meant to be easily removable, which I think is fine. It's better than having a snug fit on a model like this where all of the pieces are fragile, and so if you're trying to tug at it, next thing you know, you're going to break the model. However, these hoods do come off quite easily, and so you have to make sure to have them on as correctly and securely as possible. So altogether, what that means is you have a wonderfully detailed model. It is clearly pushing the envelope in terms of how much detail and what kinds of detail you can put on these cars feasibly before you start to run into potential problems with quality and fragility. And then lastly, they are potential time bombs. If you roll them over to take a look at something, and you've got the load in, then you will basically have the loads rolling out onto your layout or onto the floor, and with that comes the hoods. So one must be careful in that way. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have a running session on the layout. I'm going to put a GP 38 or maybe a GP 60 on there and see how they actually handle on the layout.